Hello again and welcome back to the channel. This is Michael from TOEFLresources.com, and in today's video, another look at the new TOEFL writing task. That is the Writing for an Academic Discussion task. Now, as most of you know, the TOEFL is going to change on July 26th. Among many changes, the TOEFL independent essay will be removed from the test, and it's going to be replaced by a new task, which is called, as I said, the Writing for an Academic Discussion task. And that looks a little bit like what you see on the screen here. Now, I know I've put up a ton of videos about this task in the last few weeks, but there is a lot of demand for practice questions and for ideas and strategies about how to promote it. So here's one more video. Also, if you stick around to the end of the video, I'm going to make a special offer of free feedback on your practice responses. So make sure to watch all the way to the end so you can get in on that. Now let's get started by taking a quick look at the question. First up, you've got some instructions, and those are in the top left-hand side of your screen. And the instructions are pretty much the same every time the test is offered, I think, and they go like this. Your professor is teaching a class on education. Write a post responding to the professor's question. In your response, you should express and support your personal opinion and make a contribution to the discussion in your own words. An effective response will contain at least 100 words. You have 10 minutes to write. Now, the instructions are pretty much the same every time, as I said. The only thing that changes is the subject of the class. This time it's education, but it could be like marketing or history, political science, sociology, business, whatever a first-year student might take. After you've read the instructions, you get a picture of the professor, you get to read their name, and then you get the question itself. In this case, it says, in next week's class, we'll talk about different approaches to education. You know, not everyone agrees about the best way for young people to gain knowledge and learn new skills. Let's prepare by discussing whether it's better for students to take classes with a lot of discussions or classes mainly focused on lectures. What do you think? Notice that in this question, you're picking between two options. Like you have to pick whether you prefer classes with discussions or whether you prefer classes mainly focused on lectures. You pick a side and you support it. Now, a possible variation could be an open-ended question. The professor could say, what do you think about classes that are mainly focused on discussions? And then you can write anything as long as it's on topic. Be prepared for both styles. Now, the question, I've looked at the practice material released by ETS. The questions are not too long. Like in total, expect like 40, 50, maybe 60 words at the most. Not a ton of reading. After that, you can read responses by two students. Now, I'm not going to read them out loud here. You can pause the video if you want to check them out. I'll just mention a few features. Now, first up, again, the questions are like, the responses here are like 40 words, maybe 50 words, maybe a bit longer than that. They're not super long. Also, in these questions where you have to pick a side, it seems like the two students are in disagreement with each other. They don't seem to pick the same side. Now, here's one challenging part of the question. It says you have to write 100 words and you have 10 minutes to write. Well, actually, you have 10 minutes to read everything and write. So you have to do the reading and the writing in 10 minutes. Now, a lot of people have expressed some concern that that's just not enough time. They're worried they won't have enough time to write a good response if they have to read all this stuff that you see here. I want to give you a few strategies. First up, don't spend a lot of time reading the instructions. I think those are pretty much the same every time, and if you've done a lot of practice questions, you should already know what the instructions are. Secondly, as far as the question goes, really pay attention to the last half. Like that seems to be where the most important content is. Like in this case, that's where the two sides are. Like the stuff at the beginning is just sort of like the professor saying hello and introducing the general topic. So really focus on the last couple sentences there. That's the most important part. As far as the student responses go, those are somewhat less important. I don't want you to spend a lot of time reading them. I want you basically just to skim them. Like, you don't necessarily need to refer to anything they've said in your response. You really only have to worry about avoiding just repeating all the stuff they've said. So don't waste a lot of time reading it. Don't worry about maximum comprehension of what they've said. It doesn't really matter. You're being graded on your writing. You're not being graded on how well you understand what these two students have said. So keep that in mind. And overall, I want you to spend no more than like 2 or 3 minutes on the reading. Most of your time should be spent on writing. And so as you do practice questions, if you notice yourself spending like more than 2 or 3 minutes reading, you're probably doing something wrong, and I do want you to change your approach. All right, so that's a quick look at the question itself. After you've read everything, in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you've got a window where you can write your response, and you've got the basic controls provided via some buttons. You've got a cut button, a paste, an undo, and a redo button. And there's also a word counter displayed, which you can turn off if you wish. So let's take a look at a few responses that I've written to this question. First up is a somewhat longer response. This one's about 130 words, I think. Yes, that's more than the 100-word thing that was mentioned a moment ago, but you can write as much as you want. There's no penalty for writing longer responses. Now, one thing you'll notice about this response is I haven't referred to the other two students at all. I've basically ignored them completely and focused on my own ideas. That's totally acceptable. I'm going to read it, and then I'll talk about some strategies and useful phrases I've used. So here it goes. Both options have real advantages, but I'm convinced that interactive classes are much better than ones where we just sit and passively listen to a professor. Discussions require a certain amount of preparation, so they encourage learners to do plenty of pre-reading before coming to class. Whenever we prepare for a topic in advance, we increase our likelihood of retaining memories of specific details and concepts. People who are able to master challenging academic topics get higher grades on tests and assignments. Moreover, nowadays it's really easy to record our classes, so we can create a record to refer to later in case we forget something that was brought up by a classmate or a professor. Overall, I'd say that spirited discussions create a stimulating academic environment that everyone can benefit from. All right, so now highlighted in yellow are a few useful phrases that you can use in your answers. I hesitate to call this a template, but it's basically the same sort of thing. Like, I began by saying both options have real advantages, but I'm convinced that. That's a phrase that you could use in your response, like basically no matter what the topic is, right? I also use the phrase moreover before bringing up a new point. That's something that you could do in your response. And then at the end, I use the phrase overall, I'd say that. And then I basically restated my main point in a different way. That's a phrase that you could use in your response as well. So here you've got 3 useful phrases you can use to give some structure to your responses. Now, in my last video on this topic, I really tried to emphasize how you need to show off some grammatical complexity in your response. And I talked about using conjunctions. And that's what I've done here. I've used the coordinating conjunctions but, so, and so. And that's something you should definitely do in your response. I also use the subordinating conjunction whenever. Again, that's something you should do in your response. You need to use a few compound sentences and, maybe some complex sentences as well. You might write a perfect response, right, with perfect grammar and perfect vocabulary, but if you've only used basic, simple sentences, you might not get a perfect score. So keep that in mind. And this is something you want to practice. It can be tricky. You know, you're writing like 120 words. It's hard to fit in grammatical variety in such a short response, right? You really have to make a conscious effort. Like when I'm writing my practice responses, like sometimes I don't use conjunctions unless I actually kind of force myself to do it. It's just because it's so short. Sometimes it doesn't feel necessary, but you really should. Here's another response. This one's a little bit shorter. I think it's like 115 words, which is totally fine. Like you only really need to write about 100 or more, so this is good. This response is a little bit different. Here, I've tried to engage a little bit with the other two students. I've mentioned them by name, and I've kind of referenced a few things that they said. This is a different approach to the task. It's also acceptable, and some people might find it a little bit easier. Just remember, though, that you should not just be repeating exactly what they've already said. If you're going to bring something up, you need to expand on it, or you should challenge it or respond to it. So let's read it, and then we'll take a look at some strategies. I wrote, in my opinion, interactive classes are much better than ones where we just sit and passively listen to a professor. I strongly agree with Mike's perspective, and I'd add that we need to prepare for discussions in advance, which also improves our retention of specific details and concepts. When we have a deeper understanding of academic topics, we get higher grades on tests and assignments. While Rachel is right about the fact that it's hard to stay focused while a conversation is going on, it's extremely easy to record our classes. If we need to refer back to things that were mentioned in a class, we can just listen to a recording of it. All right, so highlighted in yellow are a few useful phrases, some template sentences that you could use in your response. I started with, in my opinion, are much better than, So that's something you could use, right? No matter what the topic is. You could say, in my opinion, working from home is much better than working at an office. In my opinion, improving the economy is much better than improving the environment. You see what I mean? That's a phrase you could try. You could also say something like, I strongly agree with Mike's perspective, and I'd add that. That's kind of a phrase you can use, right? No matter what Mike is talking about. And then I also said, while Rachel is right about, and then I mentioned something she brought up, but then I responded to it. And so that's kind of a useful phrase you could use in your responses as well, right? Well, Rachel is right about, well, Simon is right about, well, Bob is right about. You could use things like that. Highlighted in green are a few of the things I've done to show more grammatical complexity. In this case, I really went in on the subordinating conjunctions, which, when, and while. So that kind of gave my sentences more complexity. It showed off what I know about grammar. I've also used an if conditional sentence at the end. Again, that shows off a bit more of my mastery of English grammar. And that is absolutely something you need to do in your responses. You don't have a lot of room to do it, so you have to focus. You got to be thoughtful. You got to come into the test with a plan to show off some grammatical complexity. All right, that's all I have to say today about the new writing task. But if you want to know more about what I'm doing, you can check out the website TOEFLresources.com, where I have guides to every section of the test. There's sample responses, sample questions, probably whatever you're looking for. Meanwhile, here's the offer. If you are preparing for this section of the TOEFL, rewind the video back to the beginning and look at the sample question. I want you to write a response and then copy it into the comments down below. If you copy it down and I see that you're subscribed to the channel, I will do my best to comment on your response. I'll estimate what I think it would score on test day, and I'll give you a little bit of basic feedback about what you could do better next time you practice. And I'll try to make a few comments about grammar or vocabulary errors that I see. I think that's a really good way to for everyone to get a higher score in the writing section of the test. Meanwhile, if you do have any questions about the TOEFL, questions about the changes that are upcoming, or questions about stuff that isn't changing, leave those down in the comments as well, and I'll try to answer them as soon as I can. All right, I will leave it at that, but please come back in a few more days. I am going to have many more videos about the TOEFL writing section. Take care until then. Goodbye.